say good afternoon now because it's noon. Thank you so much for coming. This is wonderful. This is only our second Romney, let's see, historic Romney, what did I say?
Romney on the menu.
It's Romney on the menu, but what's the first couple words? We're going to get it down by next month.
History lunch.
History luncheon, Romney on the menu, and we have had Norwood Haynes as our speaker last time. We've got Jane Wright Slocum as our speaker this time. We are trying to get more and more people who can share a history of our wonderful town, and so this is a great way of doing it. It's a brown bag lunch, but there's Lil's Grill out there. That's one of the reasons why we moved over here. Plus this has got tables and more chairs, so hopefully this works out well for you too. We have a scanner over here that Charlie Hall has in the works, so if any of you have brought any photos that he can scan as a way of kind of preserving some history too, or if you haven't brought them this time, I don't know, Charlie, are you coming next time? No. So.
Then get in touch with me now.
All right, get in touch with Charlie Hall to scan some photos. Okay. Jane has lived here how many years of your life?
All of them except 5 when I was away at school and 6 when we lived in Martinsburg.
Wow.
Keep coming back.
Yes.
So it's a nice place to come back to. I have 2 things I can talk about. One is about the Indian Mound Cemetery, which is in Romney, and the other is about the suburbs of Romney. Something very, very dear to me, and that's orchards, because I grew up with orchard families. And in trying to find some information about some of the older orchards, I spent some time in the courthouse several years ago. And one thing I found out, well, I'll start first. Apples and peaches were the main products grown here. Apples were brought to this country from Europe by the early settlers. And so probably most everybody had their own little orchards in their backyards or farms. Peaches were brought from Spain, and they were brought into the southern part of the colonies. So just to let you know that neither one of them are natives of our country here. I've got some things here, and I've got them all mixed up, of course, because that's kind of been my life story, getting things mixed up. What I wanted to tell you, and I cannot find the paper that I had it written on, were some of the interesting names of some of the early orchards that were in the western part of Hampshire County. And these are some names I ran across. Now these were orchards that were very, very early, that were consolidated companies, big family orchards, whatever you might find. And they started here, these big orchards, in the late 1800s, so in the 1890s. So here's some of the names I found. Hampshire Orchard, Romney Orchard, Mill Mountain Orchard, Golden Orchard, Fairfax, Buckeye, Mutual, Hilltop, South Branch, Sunrise, Twin Mountain, Levels, High Knob, Mountain State, Points, Potomac Highland Company, Okonoke, Green Spring, Imperial. And the list would just go on and on and on. So there were a lot of smaller family orchards, and then some of the bigger orchards that were being developed. The Miller name is associated very closely with some of the very early larger orchards. And I brought some props with me because it's easier to talk about things when you have a few props. And as you see here, I'll talk about these a little later. They're all old, kind of like me. And they're sort of beat up. But going back to my family, I'm going to speak a little bit about my family because they were orchardists from long ago. Our grandfather, Samuel Williams, who was also a Confederate soldier. I have a grandfather who was a Confederate soldier. A lot of people question that, but it's true. His youngest grandson is Gene Hughes Williams, and he's a good bit younger than I am. So that spanned a long period of time. But anyway, my grandfather was very interested in orchards, and then it passed on to his family. He had 7 boys, and 2 or 3 of those young men then went into the orchard business. Now, the particular orchard that I'm going to speak about mostly, because this is the one I'm most familiar with, if you had the chance to drive into Romney from east to west, as you got to about where the Cool Wink Motel is, you would look straight into what some people call a mountain, some people call a ridge. Well, our family's orchards were on those 2 ridges, and to get to them, the roads were horrible. They were very steep, and they were on both mountains because Mechanicsburg Gap separates them. So they'd have to bring equipment down from one and go on west on Route 50 and go back up on the other orchard. But the way this came into our family, it was first started by William Cornwall, and I think he was a brother of Governor Cornwall, John Cornwall, and some people from Fairmont. And early on, because my grandfather, I think, here again, some of this is not written down, not in record. My grandfather was hired, I think, to have it cleared. So that was done in about 1909. And from then on, the clearing occurred, which was a terrible job. They had lots of mules, and when you're looking at that ridge or mountain, you can see a break that sort of runs parallel to the top of the mountain. And we always referred to that as the bench. And so on the bench, it was wide enough in places that there were several houses built up there, a large stable where they kept the mules, and a lot of the men lived there. So they worked on clearing the orchards and planting those early orchards. I remember the bench much later because my mother never knew where I was. She kept my 3 older sisters very confined, but I guess she just got tired of doing that. So I was always running up and down on the bench, and there were still some people living there. In 1923 and 24, the first group who set out these orchards were selling, and it was to be sold at the courthouse. And now here again, I'm going to tell you some things about my family. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. My father went to the sale, and he bought it. His brother was cashier at the bank, which was catty-corner to the courthouse. And Loudon Thompson, dear Loudon Thompson's no longer with us, but he told me 2 very interesting stories about that because his father was a lawyer here in town and associated with the banks. They said that my father's brother came across the street. He said, well, Dan, who bought the orchards up there? And he said, well, I did. And they said, Uncle Marvin nearly fell over. He says, what's wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Why would you do that? And so then the next thing that happened, my father had very good partners. There were 4 of them. The next thing that happened, they needed money to help with the labor and cost of picking this orchard up. Orchard was in excellent condition. And he went to the bank to borrow money for this. Now his uncle had lent him $10,000 to buy this orchard. A lot of land up there. And in that sale, it included this, they called it an aerial transport of some sort, which I don't remember it. It was gone before I came along, but it was built in 1909 by the first group of people. It did not go to the top of the mountain because if you're familiar with that at all, it's very steep land on this side of the mountain. And so this stayed in the sale, plus all of the machinery, all of the personal things, that would have been some of the houses, and the packing house, which is still in Vanderlip, and a man has cleaned it up very nicely. The siding to the railroad, which held 5 railroad cars. I think they must have been shorter at that time because it could not have held 5 when we were there. And then all the equipment that was in the packing house went for $10,000. So, anyway, they bought a good piece of property. But the second thing was he went to the bank to borrow $10,000 to help with expenses, and they wouldn't lend it to him. The director said, no, we're not going to lend it to him. Well, Loudon Thompson's father was a director, and he said, if you do not lend that money to him, I'm going to lend it to him personally. So he got the money, and they had a very successful orchard for many, many years. Now, some of the things I wanted to tell you about it, at that time, most things were packed in barrels. And I could not find a picture. I had a barrel once, an apple barrel, but I don't have it now. And they were packed in barrels and carried into Romney to the depot. And the depot was a very, very busy place at that time. And I can remember going to the depot to get things that were brought in by train. This is a picture that Schaefer's, I think Carter Wagner had put on on a calendar. And I don't know if you see it or not, but you can see fruit, and I'm assuming there it probably is apples just from the clothing. If you want to pass that around, but you can see it later. They had both crates that looked kind of like crates that oranges were mailed in for a long time, and then Delaware. Now this I did have, I dug around in some things at our house, and this is a Delaware basket. And the bushels were a little bigger, so I think those must have been bushel size. So they had a lid that fit on them some way, and then they progressed to this type of basket to ship peaches and apples both in. Now this was quite a process to fill this basket. This was a lid, and this one is, by the way, from Phoenix Orchard, which was part of the orchard that our family had. In order to get this basket so it would be beautiful when the lid came off, this is the process. They had a metal tub, and I couldn't find one of those, that most of the ladies faced the apples or the peaches. They put the beautiful red side down, lined them up in perfect order, around and around and around and around. Little concave there, so they would look nice. And then that facing pan was sent across the piece of machinery to the men who were filling the baskets, the basket's not there yet. They put a metal tub on top of that facing pan with a paper liner inside. If they didn't put the paper liner inside, there would be peaches everywhere. Then they supposedly, very carefully, put especially peaches in and sent it on a roller to another little area where a man would take that metal tub off very carefully. Somebody would put the basket down on top of it very carefully. So here it is upside down. So this thing then went through another little roller into a piece of equipment that somebody flipped real hard and turned it up this way. So then they took the facing pan off, and here was this beautiful basket of peaches. Then they laid a pad on top of that was filled with some kind of paper or something. And then another man came along, slipped this lid into there, and with a piece of equipment that looked kind of like a big cake turner, but it was a big heavy piece of equipment. He'd put it under there and flip it up here, and then this lid would go in place. Then they put these little holders on the side. So these, I remember these things, these processes. So in our case, we mailed a lot or sent a lot of packed peaches. I helped with peaches mostly because I was in school most of the time. The apples were being packed. They went on a conveyor belt to a basement and then rolled out to the cars, the railroad cars. And that was a fun thing too. Now, they could not stack them more than 3 high. And I think there were about 300 in there. I cannot remember. But a man would come and show the loader how to load them. And this was to keep those cars from swaying and upsetting off the track. But now in the ends of these cars were big blocks of ice, because the cars were insulated. And it was so much fun to be appointed to go get the ice to put in the bucket of water where everybody drank out of one cup, out of one bucket, and nobody ever got sick. That's what I think is a miracle. And anyway, this process only lasted about 3 or 4 weeks, and that was the end of our family's peach season. They were somewhat limited in the amount of varieties of fruit, so it was a real hectic time for about 4 weeks. And then trailer trucks started carrying the loads, and they could stack them higher and get many more baskets in. A lot of people would bring boxes, and the peaches would just be put in either tree run or run through the equipment to get all the fuzz off and size them. And so it was an interesting time, and sometimes in our case there might be 25 people helping do this. And sometimes we would pack maybe as many as 1,000 bushels a day. So it was, I mean, it would be from 7 in the morning till midnight sometimes. So it was very intensive and a great deal of fun for me because I grew up with it. And then in time, our family with the partners, and the partners were Albert Corbin, Harold Reynolds, and Paul Williams, my father's brother, Dan's brother. They bought 2 other orchards that had been developed by one of the Miller men. One was in Paw Paw, and one was at Pinto. And Pinto, if you go to Cumberland on Route 28 and get the short gap, you would turn there and go a few miles, and then it was a pretty bad road that went to the orchard at the time I remember. Since then, it's a much better road, which turns off at the quarry, if you all are familiar with the quarry over there on Pinto Road. And that orchard had cherries that, to me, could beat anything that comes off the West Coast. They were beautiful. And they sold them 10 cents a pound, pick your own. And they sold the sour cherries for 5 cents a pound until some of the people who would come to pick would bring milk cans, fill them up with sweet cherries, and put top on the sour cherries. Well, the men who worked there, when they would pick it up, they knew exactly what was going on. So then they just charged 10 cents for everything. Now, this is the way they advertised the cherries. And I had the job, after I was able to drive, of going all over Maryland and Pennsylvania, putting these out in little grocery stores or wherever. And it says on here that the largest crop of sweet cherries expected at our orchards at Pinto and Paw Paw. Paw Paw had some too. Bring containers, pick your own. Picking dates for each variety will be advertised in local papers and broadcast on local radio stations. And then they had phone numbers of people to contact. And that cherry day, it was something else again. People would come the day before and bring picnics and spend the night to get in first. But I mean, there was a huge amount of cherries on this Pinto orchard, so everybody got all that they wanted. We had some Amish people who came, and they picked 1,000 pounds every year. Wow. They were always within just a few pounds of 1,000 pounds. Did you look?
No.
Oh, I thought you were asking for something. So anyway, that just gives you kind of a rundown.
Expensive. My dad sold hail insurance, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. And the orchardists would buy hail insurance to protect, to insure either the peach crop or the apple crop or both. And if we had hail, which of course damaged the crop, then they would descend on the orchard and walk through the rows of orchard trees, checking each tree to see how much damage, and the percentage they would pay based on the percentage of damage. And sometimes they were completely, the crop was completely lost, and other times it would maybe be 50% damage.
I can remember one year, and it was maybe in the late 40s or early 50s, they bought hail insurance, but they didn't receive anything from it, and I don't know why. It just ruined, I mean, even damaged trees, but for some reason, maybe they didn't have it long enough. I don't know what the problem was, but they weren't very happy about that. So, anyway.
They didn't have Carol writing the policy, that was the
Perhaps they didn't exceed they took a larger deductible, hoping that they wouldn't need it, but
I don't know, I see, you had to have it for a period of time. Don't even know who was selling it to them. In fact, you know, at the time, they had big companies that were away from here, like Hagerstown seemed to have a lot of companies that would lend money. And they may have had, that may have been where these early insurance companies started, you know, with the hail. Because I know in time it was a godsend to the orchardists to have that, have the hail insurance. So,
okay, well,
Do you happen to remember, or would you know, how far away some of Romney Fruit and Orchard got to?
some went to Europe. Some went to Europe.
Oh, okay.
And you know, the York apple is not grown very much anymore. I mean, it is, but it's been improved, so it doesn't look like the old York. The old York was a very lopsided apple. It was a great apple because it was not really very good until January, February, and it formed sort of a wax. But I don't know who had shipped these Yorks to Europe, but they said, well, there was something wrong with them. They're all lopsided. They sent us the worst, you know.
Well, I just asked, my father and grandfather, his father, were small town grocery store operators in the northern panhandle. And I can remember as a kid unloading fruit and vegetables. And now I'm just wondering, my father's long since gone, I wonder if, you know, some of that fruit or apples, peaches may have come from Romney.
Our family sent a lot to the Ohio, right
Valley.
along the river, all the way north and south. A lot went into that area. And then we had a lot of people who came out of the south and got them. Then we had a lot of individuals who had grocery stores or fruit markets.
Yeah.
They would come with their truck and maybe buy 100 tree run. So sold a lot of them that way now. I think Gary Shanholtz does a lot of that now. He just sells to people who come in a lot. But that packing process, it was something else again. It was fun for me. But it was.
I'm going to stop you now and move to the cemeteries because we have no other
This little hammer I brought, some man gave it to me who was selling stuff, and he was from it's a box terrier, and it's made in the U.S. But anyway, it was to hammer these little nails down in the boxes when they worked out. And I've had that always. In fact, at one time I used to carry it in my pocketbook because I thought, but I still have it. Nobody gets to borrow this. Okay, let's go to the cemetery. And I have a lot of things about the cemetery that Jenny Heatle gave me. She just had wonderful documented things and histories of the cemetery. So I'll go through this really quickly because a couple times during Heritage Days we had tours, and I got to do those tours. And some days the gnats just about carried you away. It is one of the nattiest places you've ever been. Don't know why. But this was one thing. This lady, if anybody would like to look at it from the Cape and Bridge area or Cape and Valley area, she is buried in the cemetery. And her name is Maud Pugh, and she wrote a lot of genealogy about the Pugh family, which I think most of them came from almost the Virginia line, the northern part of Hampshire County. But anyway, very interesting.
Can I say something about her? Miss Maud
Right.
lived down Pepper Lane in Pleasantdale. I lived in Pleasantdale and Pepper Lane. She lived a mile and a half down Pepper Lane. One time a Greyhound bus stopped close to 10 o'clock at night in front of our house. around 50. And Miss Floyd got off, she knocked on her door and asked if we had a lantern. She was going to walk down Pepper Lane to her home. It's maybe a mile and a half, something. So Daddy fixed her a lantern. He offered, whether Daddy offered her to stay the night. No, she had to get home. She walked Pepper Lane at night, 10, 11 o'clock at night, with this lantern, and survived. But we have an autographed book that she gave Mother and Dad, and that she autographed and fallen, you know, but she was a remarkable lady.
Is Pew her maiden name or her?
Yes, she was not,
She was Miss
she was not married.
Miss Mock, yeah, okay.
and wonderful things there. And, but then to get to the cemetery, it was given, that piece of property, given by David Gibson, who was, he was a very interesting man himself. He was a merchant, he was a politician, wealthy man, I think. And he built the brick house the first house that you see on River Road on the left. He built, that was David Gibson's house. And he built it in 1835, I think. So,
Is that Sycamore Dale?
39 maybe.
Is that Sycamore Dale?
Sycamore Dale, yeah, Sycamore Dale. He gave the property there, and we have heard, here again, it's just off the cuff, that when his wife passed away, that he wanted her buried there, and I guess that's what happened. And there were some conditions with this cemetery that he made at the time he gave it, and no one was ever to dig into the mound. And the mound, we think, goes back to the Hopewellian Indians, maybe somewhere between 100 and 500 years AD, not before BC. They were mound builders. That particular mound is not very big, and of course it's worn away through the years. It's sort of an oval, and it's about 7 feet wide in the widest place and 15 feet long. And so it is still there. So he did say that it should not be disturbed. The cemetery now is in 3 sections, and part of this was his planning. The part around the mound, the older part of the cemetery, was designated for white people. For people of color, he designated the lower part where they are buried. And at that time, Route 50 ran right in between it. You can still see a road there, but Route 50 sort of wound around down through there. Anyway, Indian Mound Cemetery Company, which would have been what he gave, was formed around 1859 and incorporated at the General Assembly in Virginia in 1860. So I'll go on through here. The oldest stones we know are stones that came from the Presbyterian Church, which was located on the corner where the fire hall is now. And there was an old church there, and then the cemetery was there. So they moved a lot of those stones down to Indian Mound. I don't know that any of them, you can see the names on any of them. But then as you go in, there's the Parsons Bell Tower, which was built in 1925 by Eddie Jacobs. His mother, I think, had been a Parsons, and he built it. We call it the Parsons Bell Tower. And at the time he built it, it had a very good working bell on the top. And then inside, and I was down past there this morning, it needs to be cleaned up badly, but inside are these inscriptions. In fact, they're hanging on the wall, and that was one reason they put a gate on there, because they could be pulled off very easily. But different family members that he had inscribed into these marble or granite or whatever it is hanging on the wall. So one thing he wanted was whenever a Parsons descendant was buried there, the bells would be rung. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The oldest stone we found there, we did find, and I think it may have come from the Presbyterian, the old Presbyterian cemetery, was 1785, and the initials SW are on it, and that's it. So we don't know anything about that. So then as you move on into the cemetery, you come to the Confederate Memorial, and, well, actually, to the right of the Confederate Memorial is sort of a small plot of ground, and you will see, and one of my uncles once said, and he was always making interesting remarks. He said, some fella asked me who all those Mounds were in there that were buried there. It must have been an awful big family. But they were unknowns. So I think he made that up because he was always making things up. Anyway, these markers that are there, the metal markers, and what are they called? The Southern Cross or something? I think Southern Cross. You'll see them in front of all of these stones of the Confederate soldiers. And those fellows were here and died here in this area. But these markers are all over the older part of the cemetery because there are a lot of Confederate men buried in there. So then let's see. The monument itself is 15 feet high and 4 square feet at the bottom. And it could very well be the first monument set up as dedication to the Southern cause. In 1866, women formed the Daughters of Old Hampshire, and they raised enough money, which was approximately $1,400, and had that shipped in here. Now, the story goes that they shipped it in separate pieces so the Yankees wouldn't know what was going on. Not the Yankees, but those who won the war wouldn't desecrate them or something. I think they shipped them in small pieces because it'd be heavy to ship all of that in one piece. But however it was. But anyway, in 1867, that was when I think it finally was put in there. And there were 125 names engraved on that of men who fought in that war and gave their lives. Now, next, just on beyond a little bit farther, how many of you are Redskin fans? Well, the owner and founder of the Redskins is buried there. His name is George Preston Marshall. He grew up in Romney. And he grew up, I think, in the house that Will Hicks lives in now, on Rosemary Lane.
Which house is that?
Oh, Will Hicks, on Rosemary Lane down towards the state school. Yeah, I think that's the house where he grew up. But he left here very early. He may have been educated somewhat at the Potomac Academy. I do not know. But he evidently was a very flamboyant, interesting man. And he was married to somebody who was a silent movie star one time. And he started his business down there in the dry cleaning business. But he was also the first man to start halftime shows during pro football. And I thought that was interesting too. So, and I think he died in, oh, this is an interesting story. And he died sometime in the 1960s. And Susan Ewers, who was from here, and she would have been Bonnie's aunt, knew that he was going, she knew them. She knew the mother real well. And they said, here came this huge delegation and all of their big limos and what have you, and following the hearse. And they got to the cemetery, and they didn't have a preacher. And she was there, and she said, I know just the man to get for you. Well, right across the street was Dr. Kittner. And Dr. Kittner looked like the pictures of Prince Albert on the Prince Albert tobacco can. But he was a dear man, and he came to the cemetery and buried Mr. Marshall. And they said he gave him a wonderful send-off. That's what some of the local people said. I thought that was an interesting story too. So anyway, there's just so many people buried in that cemetery that were so important to Romney and its area. The Davis sisters, where the log house is, they and their family are buried there. I guess their father and a brother were Confederate soldiers, and one was a Yankee soldier, and he's the only one that ever, his wife was the only one to ever receive a pension after the war, because the Confederates didn't have any money, of course. But this is another bit of notoriety.
What was the name of the family that?
Davis family.
Davis family.
And they gave the property there for the library.
Okay.
So they lived in the log house.
Got it.
Anyway, this is kind of sad. There was a Mr. Crabtree, and I think from what I've heard about him, he was a little eccentric or something. Something was wrong. But he had some arguments with people. And anyway, he decided to kill them. And he had a hit list. And he had, on his hit list were 7. He did kill the Justice of the Peace, Carter Inskip, the jailer, Ben Miller, and Bill Wolford, who they said just happened to be there. Wrong place at the wrong time. And then that he had personal grudges against these people. Also on his list were the Sheriff Burr Seville, Judge Kump, a policeman, a state policeman, and the clerk of the county court, Mr. Bob Ruckman. But they escaped somehow. And poor Mr. Crabtree, they said he was the last man hanged in West Virginia, but there's a question about that, but he was one of the last. He is buried there someplace. There's no marker. So anyway, William Henry Foote, this man was highly educated. He was got his degree from Yale. He got his divinity degree from Princeton Theological Seminary. He was the 3rd Presbyterian minister in Romney. He was head of the Classical Institute, which had close ties with the Presbyterian Church. He started the Potomac Seminary, or the Potomac Academy, and he also was very active in the Literary Society. Highly educated man. Now, James Armstrong is buried there. He was a judge for 16 years, and he married the daughter of Dr. Foote. Now, these are very interesting. These are the Jacob stones. The Reverend John Jeremiah Jacob was a captain during the Revolutionary War. He was also a Methodist minister, and he, I think, served for 50 years maybe as a Methodist minister. His first wife, well, I'm not going to go into that. His second wife was the mother of J.J. Jacobs, who was the 4th governor of West Virginia. J.J. Jacobs is buried there also. Now, the Reverend John Jeremiah Jacob was a member of the Society of the Cincinnati. Has anybody ever heard of that? Yes. The Society of the Cincinnati. They were officers of the Revolutionary War, along with officers from France who fought in the with the Continental Army. And this society was established in 1883, I think, or something like that. This man was a member of that. Very prestigious thing. And if you go to the cemetery, you would go straight back from the entrance to those old stones, and there is a marker there, an emblem, that says the Society of the Cincinnati. And it has not been there very long, so that if you're ever down there, that's an interesting thing to look at. Gibson, I say he was a very prominent man. Now, Miss Maud Pugh, I have that. She was a teacher, poet. She wrote History of the Pugh family and a lot of genealogies, I think. The White family, they were very active. They were politicians, military. Now here's one, John Jacob Cornwall, who was our governor during World War I. He was the only Democrat to win a seat that year in West Virginia. But he served in Charleston for 4 years. He established the state police. Also, all that warring that went on between the Hatfields and McCoys and the coal industry went on during his term. And I have another very interesting story too. My father fought in World War I, and he was at Camp Lee, and one of his officers came and said, "You're to report to such and such an officer." Well, my father wondered, well, what's going on? Anyway, Governor Cornwall was there viewing the troops that day, and he asked my father to come and sit with him. They had known each other quite well. There was quite an age difference, but they admired each other very much, and so he got to sit in the reviewing stand, which was a wonderful story for our family. Mr. Cornwall, who was the editor of the Hampshire Review for many, many years, and he was the chief counsel for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, and he had offices in Baltimore. So he was a very prominent man. Now this man, I think, is a wonderful story about him. Howard H. Johnson was born in, I don't know, it might be mine, just got a ring. He was born in Franklin, West Virginia. He was blind at birth, and he was very instrumental and responsible for getting the school for the blind and deaf established in Romney. Howard H. Johnson. And so he was educated in Stanton, at the Stanton School for the Blind. He was very interested in promoting everything that the blind were capable of doing. So I think that's great. The Reverend George Allen Gibbons, born in 1843, was rector of the Episcopal Church, and he served Romney and Moorfield for 32 years. He, I think, started serving the Episcopal Church the same year that it was built. So that's interesting. And John Blue, you've heard a lot about John Blue, Captain John Blue. He is buried there. Lots of interesting names, but the next I have are Cump graves. And a Mr. and Mrs. Cump, Benjamin and Francis, were the parents of Herman Guy Cump, who at the time was living in Elkins. He became a governor. So we have 3 governor connections in that little cemetery in Romney. And I think that's quite interesting too. And then another wonderful story that Jenny Pancake gave me the information and I've lost it or lent it to somebody. Woodman of the World Life Insurance Society. Have you ever heard of it? Yes. It's still there. Woodman of the World Life Insurance Company. Sold, I guess, a tremendous amount of insurance in this area many, many years ago. Up until 1920, when somebody bought a life insurance policy, they could also somehow, I lost the material, this is just what I'm trying to remember, could get headstones or corner markers which looked like tree stumps or a log. Now, if you're in the cemetery at Indian Mound and you find the Indian Mound just sort of over the hill, there are a lot of them. And I think your family have a lot of these stones, and they're just interesting. I mean, to see these stumps. And they could get, I think if they paid more money, they'd get a different type or something, but it all has to do with the family tree, you know, and the loss. Yeah. So, up until 1920, that was included in the insurance policy. After 1920, for some period of time, they had to add 10 cents to help defray these costs. But I'm going to end on that note, unless you have some questions.
I would love her to go on and on, but it was perfect timing to stop because we've got like a minute and a half for me to give just a thank you for all of you for coming out. If anybody would like to also partake in this if you have things to share. And again, we want everyone to be encouraged to give Charlie a call if you have some photographs, because those things are going to get lost. They're going to be in your attic and someone's going to say, look, what are these, you know, type of thing.
There's one thing I thought about coming into Romney. The first thing I want to say is thank you to all the people who have turned this co-op, which I remember well, into what it is now.
Yeah. She set a high bar. We don't need to have this depth. This has been absolutely wonderful. And we might pick your brain about some of these things.
Another thing I did that some of our bureaucracies would really down on us right now. My father had a pickup, and it had racks on it, and I was 18, I think. We would take some of the workers from here in Romney, go to Paw Paw to pick cherries, and they would bring their children because, you know, the more they could pick, the better for them. I drove that pickup, and those people sat in the back of that pickup. Now, can you imagine that happening today? Now, who insured you? What? Oh, I don't know. But, now, a couple other interesting things. During World War II, there were very few men around, and everybody in all of the orchards, not just ours, but I'm, of course, familiar with ours, they had kids of all ages there picking and thinning peaches and apples. And then one year in particular, and Bonnie Long's husband Gary told me this, we had a wonderful football team in the 1948s and 49s, that period of time. And somehow my father talked the coach into getting those football players to go over there on that mountain and pick peaches for in the morning. And Gary said, if you were lucky enough to catch one of the trucks going off, that was good. Otherwise, you had to walk off of that mountain. He said that was terrible. Then they practiced football afternoon. So, you know, the labor problems became one of the big stumbling blocks for orchards here. And then, of course, sprays became extremely expensive. Machinery became very expensive. So a lot of the orchards did not survive part of that. The orchards that were, you know, some of the orchards that are here today, I just marvel at how they have continued. They've been here a long time and they're continuing to produce, so, which is just marvelous for us. You know, the housing was part of the problem for laborers because not all of them lived close by. So there were, in time, camps built by orchards. And then that then brought in seasonal workers who stayed through the apple season. And then a lot of the early seasonal workers came out of Florida because they just moved up the coast doing various picking jobs. And then we had a lot of Jamaicans here at one time in Romney. And these were things that I remembered from the 1950s and 1960s. Now, our family sold those orchards in 1963. It was a good time. And then a group of orchardists got together and built the co-op cold storage, which is right there where you get off on the train if you're riding the Potomac Eagle. And it now belongs to, I can't think of his name, but...
Ken Hopkins? Who? Ken Hopkins?
Yeah, Ken Hopkins. But that was the community cold storage. And there were a few orchards that had their own cold storages, but not too many did. So that was a wonderful thing for our people here in the area who were producing this fruit. Then Johnny Reynolds put in a thing, some piece of equipment called a Sterile Cooler, which ran the peaches through this very cold water somewhat, and then they would be stored or shipped. I don't think those peaches were that good, you know, but it did lengthen the season. But they weren't quite like a beautiful peach off of the tree that's dead ripe. So anyway, that's about all I have to say about about the orchards. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. But I did have this box. Thanks to Rob Wolford, he saw this at a sale. And I don't know whether it was one of ours or not, but the boxes we have now, which are not bin boxes, have a support inside, which of course would be a little better for peaches because they wouldn't get shoved back in that corner. But it also wouldn't make a very good box to sit on. The others are great to sit on. The newer ones, I say, which were starting to be built. Cumberland Box Company, owned by Perry Smith, provided most of the boxes to our area. Berryville Basket Company provided most of the baskets, and they were just this beautiful light color. And they would come in stacks of 50 or 100, I don't recall that, but I can just remember those tall stacks of brand new baskets, and the men would just have to knock them over on the floor to kind of loosen them so they could get them apart. So those are just some of the things I remember. Yeah. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
At the top of the basket.
You'll have to talk real loud because I can't hear.
At the top of the baskets, and didn't they have purple shredded?
Well, apples did, but the peaches had a big pad. But the apples had the shredded paper, and it was either purple or red.
I remember
And,
purple.
but they did, it was the same process of putting them in the basket. And then they'd sprinkle all that over, and it had kind of an odor to it that I think helped maybe preserve them. It was pleasant, you know, it was nothing that was offensive at all. But I think that was just primarily apples. Then we went to, instead of picking and putting them in these Delawares, which were packed in the orchard, and the barrels were packed in the orchard. Well, another thing I want to tell you. When they were picking apples, there were two men that worked for our family that raced against one another, and each one of them tried to pick 100 barrels of apples a day. They would start at dawn and work into the night if they could. There are 3 bushels in a barrel. So they were trying to reach 300 bushels a day. But both of those men, one was Ed Haynes and the other one was not Riley Corbin, but another Corbin man. They had big hands for one thing, you know, they could get 2 or 3 apples at a time. They had picking bags, and boy, I know they were just up and down those ladders so fast. But strong, good men. But they kind of raced against one another, which made it quite easy, quite interesting. So,
How were they paid? Were they paid?
they were paid piecework in the apples. The peaches they did not, because peaches bruise so easily. They were just paid by hourly wages. So, and peaches did bruise, and I've often wondered, because the way those baskets were handled after they were packed was not with kid gloves. I mean, it was just, they would jam them into that truck, you know, trying to get them to fit real tight. I just often wondered what they looked like when they got them on. They got them, what those peaches taste like. Because they had to be picked pretty firm. They have what they call a ground color, which is just when there's a little bit of a yellow cast to the peach, and it could still be pretty green, but just it's changing it, and they always watch for the ground color. So, anyway.
Yep, and then they would write them in the basket on their way to the market.
Yes, yeah. And I know one time we had sent, I don't know, 5 or 6 railroad car loads to Boston, and there was a railroad strike there. That hurt, because nobody paid for it. So anyway, they all brought it. Yeah.
You mentioned the depot that you would bring it
Pardon
down.
me?
You mentioned the depot.
Yes.
Where was that located? Was
Okay.
that up on 50 West where
No.
the train crosses there?
Right here in town.
Oh,
You go down Sioux Lane. Are you familiar with Sioux Lane?
no, I'm new to this area.
Oh, okay.
Learning.
And you know, Romney was really a bustling place at that time, up until the 70s even, I think. There was a lot of business. Romney had everything you needed right here.
Wow.
And as you go down past 7-Eleven,
Okay.
That's called Bolton Street. You go about 3 blocks, and then there was a street that led off and went down into this lower area because the railroad brought sidings up there. And it was a busy place. The railroad, I think, served Romney starting in the 1890s, if I'm not correct. Might have been a little before, but they had passenger service. And then they went from Romney on towards Moorfield, starting in the late 1890s, I think, because some of my father's brothers were Waterboys on the railroad. And one in particular, and I'm kind of bragging here, I'm bragging, period. One of those Waterboys went on to become a lawyer and the president of a railroad company. So it was not to be in
What's a water boy?
Yeah, so he started out as a water boy.
What's the water?
What is a water boy?
They just carried water to the guys who were building the railroad.
Okay.
They were too little to handle things like that, so they made sure the water was going to them. And that was after it was going from Romney to on south.
So as they were building the railroad, that spur, they were the water boys, or,
Yeah, but they were putting a railroad from Romney to Moorfield.
okay, so they were building and laying tracks.
Oh, yes, yeah, the one that's there now, the one that Potomac Eagle.
But that's when they needed the water boys. They didn't need water boys when it was up and running.
Oh, no, no,
Okay.
no, the trains had everything they needed. Thank you very much.
Speaking of water-
And that railroad, which you ride now, it had good passenger service. It was just once a day, up and back. But they had stops, I don't know how many, maybe 10 or 12 stops between Greenspring and Romney. And then from then on, as it served on to Moorfield, they had quite a few stops too. So passenger service was there a good while. I don't recall it, but because we had buses and then cars came in. So now, well, how much time do we have?
About a half hour.
Do you have any more?
You might mention about that one delivery that came to the depot.
The what?
The delivery to the depot about the mules, I think.
Oh, yes, I read someplace, and it was in the Hampshire Review in the 100 years ago and after. In 1907, one of the men that was associated with, I think it was an orchard, he may have been a farmer, received a load of mules on the railroad, picked up his mules. So it could have been maybe some of them that were used on the mountain over here. But, and one thing about these two orchards, and then Mr. Miller had an orchard, Twin Mountain, which is on south towards Moorfield. Leatherman's orchard, just outside of Burlington, was the largest singly owned orchard in the 1940s in the nation. Maybe in the world, I'm not sure, but in the nation. That Leatherman orchard was a beautiful orchard. And the ground there was called chert. We always referred to it as chert. There were rocks. And this was one reason it was very difficult and hard on machinery. When they were plowing it and digging to plant trees, they had these rocks to contend with. But those rocks held moisture. So those orchards hardly ever had small peaches or apples. They had a supply there even during the worst droughts to bring water to them. And maybe over a period of 10 years, these partners were trying to find something for the men that they hired year-round to do between the peach season and the apple season. So they planted a lot of tomatoes, and that part of it, you could see them from over here, that real steep part of the mountain. And they were beautiful, sweet, just beautiful. And the way they planted them, they got it sort of dug up, but there were weeds and everything. They'd just pick up a rock, stick the plant in, put the rock back down. There was enough soil there, but I mean, they didn't have to dig forest and holes and plant them. They could just they just grew beautifully. And then, of course, the weeds did too, so it wasn't fun picking up there. So, and a group from Georgia bought those. And when they came, they wanted them picked very green, no stems. My father said, well, you can't pick them without stems. He said, if you want us to buy them, you're going to pick them without stems. So that took care of that. But just, they were beautiful. And then they would haul them to Georgia, store them, and then somehow turn them red with however they did it. I don't know how they did it.
So they bought the green.
Oh, yes, they had to be very green. Not, they were kind of maybe turning a little white, but they were not white, but, oh, they were so good.
And I remember my mother and I went over on the mountain and bought, or picked green tomatoes over there, and we wrapped them in newspaper.
Yeah, and stored them.
They ripened 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, maybe even sometimes, you know, they tried to keep them until Thanksgiving, you know, wrap them so they could have them for Thanksgiving dinner.
We always pick our end of the season green tomatoes and take them in the house and wrap them or keep them in a cool, dark place. And this past year, we had tomatoes up to Christmas. And far better than they still do at the store.
And there was something about, you couldn't store apples and tomatoes together, maybe because apples, there's some kind of a gas as they're ripening comes off and would spoil the other fruit. I'm just not real sure about that, but just something I remember reading something. Well, if you have no more questions, I can tell you now.
I have one.
Okay.
With the fruit and everything, what about pesticides? Was there a natural way of doing it for a while?
Not then. No, and
chemicals?
they became very expensive. And in our case, a lot of the orchard was on rather steep. They were terraced, but still, when it came time to pick apples, they had 2 lengths of ladders. For the lower one, it was a real long ladder, and for the upper part, it would be a shorter ladder. But they had to haul water. The water for these orchards was pumped from the river. And then they had what they call a speed sprayer that came into play in about the 1950s, and it just threw it everywhere. I mean, they really could, it did speed it up considerably. But the orchards had to get water to their property, so they could do that. But there were pretty nasty pesticides used. There was lead put in to kill mice or something, and yeah, it was pretty bad. But I don't know anybody that ever got sick eating our fruit either. I mean, we were there with it, and I can remember some men dipping down into those powders and plopping them over in a container that would maybe hold 50 gallons of water. And I don't know of any of them. But I guess if your body, biologically, is going to get something bad from it, it will. I don't know. I certainly don't have any answers to that. So,
How about animals like deer and groundhog? And
you know, there were not very many deer when I was growing up. And I mean, there would be some, and we would be, when I was little, be driving through the orchard, and my mother or dad would say, oh, there's a deer. And I looked, and I never saw him. I didn't point out it. Anyway, there were not very many deer up until maybe in the 1950s. Then they started having a problem with deer. Groundhogs didn't. Mice and rabbits were bad on little new trees. They'd chew around the bark and could kill them. So.